Here in the mountains, we don't have a lot of money. That's just the way it is when you live in the mountains. Vast majority of the people that live here, they just got to get by with what they've got. Well, cars seem to present this problem here in the mountains because so many things on cars these days you just can't do under a shade tree. However, there's still this little thing called a brake job. For the most part, you can do that right at your own home. They haven't bungled that up so bad that you need a ton of computers to do it. So what I'm going to show you is how to do a simple brake job, changing out the disc brakes on your car. It's very important to know how to do this because most cars have disc brakes, and one nice thing about disc brakes, the same thing has worked so well for so many years that it really hasn't changed much. The disc brakes that I changed on my old 1968 Ford are almost identical to the 2005 Hyundai Elantra we're going to do today. So other than wrench sizes and whether they're metric or standard and a couple of minor little differences, they're all the same. So if you can do one, you can do any of them. Now I'm sure eventually they're going to mess this up, but until then you can still fix your own brakes. So let's go take a look at it. Well, here we are in the shade, right by the door of the garage, and of course we're doing this in the grass because I can't fit anything in the garage yet. So the first thing you have to do is jack your car up and secure it. Now, jack stands probably would work pretty good, but this is uneven ground, so I used a couple of blocks turned this direction so they're more stable, because if the car lands on that, if the jack fails or whatever, I don't want it falling on me and tipping off the jacks or whatever. So I have it jacked up and I have the blocks under the body of the car so that it's not going to land on me. But before I jack the car up, I loosened the lug nuts on the wheel because once the wheel's in the air, it spins freely. I also set the parking brake so that the car would not roll. Another thing you can do is put blocks in front and behind the wheel so the car is just not going anywhere. And, you know, safety is important. So then after that you have to assemble your tools, and here's the basic tool kit. You need two different size wrenches. In this case we're going to get a 17 millimeter and a 14 millimeter. I have a crescent wrench, which you'll see what that's for later. I have a nice big 4-inch C-clamp. I have my little single jack hammer and a large Phillips screwdriver for this particular brake job. So let's get started. In the back of the brakes you're going to see a bolt, like two bolts like this, and you'll see this little, looks like an accordion thing. That allows the brake caliper, which is this part right here, this is the brake caliper, to float back and forth as it wears and as the wheels move, and it's just a give point. Very important. Another thing you're going to see is this bolt here. That holds the bracket here, this big thick bracket here that holds the caliper in place. So we're going to start by removing the caliper and then this bracket here that holds the caliper. Okay, we start with the 14 millimeter, and of course we want to remove these bolts. I'll loosen them both. There's one on the top and one down here on the bottom. Now you might have a little more trouble with this if you live in the Midwest and you use a lot of salt on the roads and all this stuff all just corrodes together, and you may need to use a hammer to break things up. But once you take those two out, this should come out pretty much right away, just like that. That's your caliper. And you just kind of set it back here out of the way. Then you have your worn out brake pads. The outside one usually isn't worn too badly, but as you can see there's like 1/8 of an inch left there. The inside one, however, takes the majority of the wear, and it's paper thin, as you can see. So it's done. Now before you pull this bracket off, you take a screwdriver and you stick it in the fins, if you have fins. Those are cooling fins. They're important. And the reason you do that is because you need to remove the 2 Phillips screws right here. Let's take a look at them. See these 2 Phillips screws, one here and one here? These hold the disc onto the hub. So let's pull those off. Here we go. Now these are kind of tight and you're not going to probably be able to get them by hand. So that's what the crescent wrench is for. You stick it on the handle of the screwdriver, a big screwdriver like this, and then you snap them loose, just like that. And then you can pull them off. Once you have those screws out, then you take your 17 millimeter in this case, probably be a different size in your car, but you never know, and you get the back bolts loose. This is faster with a ratchet set, but I'm doing it this way just so that you can see it can be done with basic tools. Now if you got a rust problem like I said in the Midwest, you'll want to use a ratchet set just because they're going to come out hard all the way. But then again, that's what brake cleaner and WD-40 is for, is to break through all that gunk to get your parts off the car. There we go, it's off. Now pay attention to how it came off because it's got to go back on exactly the same way. Now this is where your hammer comes in. Now these guys here, you're not saving these discs. They get replaced. So you just hit them on each side. And that brake knocks everything loose, and you work them off. There you go. Now you're down to the bare bones. Now it starts going back together. It's just that easy. The next step is you can see this piston right here. Let's get a closer look at it. That little piston right there, and you see the rubber thing sticking out. Well, that piston has to be shoved back in, so I'm going to show you how to push that piston back in. Well, it looks just like this when you start. And you take one of your brake shoes, or one of your pads they're called. They're not shoes, they're called brake pads, and you stick it in there like that. Fit your C-clamp in here. And you screw it down, and you push that piston back in. The reason you do this is because the new brake pads are much thicker than the old brake pads because they're new and the other ones are worn out. And the piston just stays out there, so your brakes are always adjusted. And so you're readjusting the brakes doing this. You're pushing that piston back in. Your big, thick, new brake pads will fit in there, and it'll work out nice. Once you get it pushed back in, now it looks like this, and that's what you want. Alright, now we start putting everything back together. The first thing you're going to want to install is your discs. Now, some discs have these and some don't. They've got the little holes that I took the Phillips screws out of, these guys here. Some brake discs have them, some don't. Some are just held on there by the wheel, and others are held on with these screws. These ones are held on with the screws. So I'm going to put them back on with the screws. So you make sure you don't line those up. Get them started. Now these are not very heavy duty. They're just to keep the disc lined up so it doesn't fall apart. There we go, got it started. Always start all your screws before you tighten any of them down. That way you don't have a problem with alignment. Things still give and align well. Now you put this bracket back on. Back the way it started. Start the top bolt. Start the bottom bolt. Run them in finger tight. Take your wrench, tighten them up. Now you'll remember that the brake pads went in next on this one. That's how it came apart. Some of them you have to install the brake pads in the caliper and then the caliper goes on. In this case you install them in the mounting bracket. Now you'll notice that they're different. One has this little finger on it here. And what this finger is it's a little device that as the pads wear, this little guy here will scrape on your disc and make a bunch of racket. But you got to make sure you get it in the right place. The way you do that is you look at the old ones. There's this one here. Look at the pattern on the back. It's kind of a horseshoe shape, which fits right down here in this horseshoe. You look at the other one. This is the one with the finger on it. You'll notice it's got a round stain on it. That's from the piston. So we know that the one with the finger goes on the inside on this car. So we'll stick it in there. And make sure you put the pad part here, the wear part, against the disc. Because if you put it backwards, it'll just tear everything up and you'll be replacing it. So, believe it or not, people have done that before. Put them in backwards. All right, put those in there. This thing, now that it's been pushed back, will slide right over those. You push your little accordions in so that they fit. There you go. Then you get your bolts and you line them up. Start with your top one. Get it started with your fingers. And you go down and line up the bottom one. You start it. Well, this is almost looking done, isn't it? There we are, nice and tight. Everything's where it belongs. And we put the wheel back on. Always start your lug nuts by hand because you don't want to cross thread them. Now that I've got them snug, I'll set the car back on the ground and tighten these lug nuts up so they don't fall off while I'm driving down the road. That is basically how you change any disc brakes. Now I just have 3 more wheels to go and I'll have all 4 disc brakes done. Hope this helped.